Hello and welcome to another edition of Space Warfighter Talks from the Space Force Association. I'm Greg Ellinger, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by a couple of Space Training and Readiness Command leaders, Brigadier General Todd Moore, the Deputy Commander of STARCOM, and Lieutenant Colonel Scott Nakatani, the Commander of the 392nd Combat Training Squadron. Both of these gentlemen participated in the Red Skies orbital warfare exercise in late 2023, December to be exact. And have both graciously agreed to talk to our Space Force Association members today about some of their experiences with that exercise, as well as some other orbital warfare related topics. General Moore, Colonel Nakatani, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Greg, thanks, bud.
Yeah, just to get started, can you tell us a little bit about some of your backgrounds and kind of how you got to your current positions and what those positions entail?
Yeah, I've had the privilege of serving for 28 years, doing a combination of Air Force Space Command and NRO operations. I've had 2 Pentagon staff assignments, AETC instructor jobs. I was a commander at both squadron group and wing level prior to being the deputy at SSDP, and then I've spent almost the past 3 years here as the STARCOM deputy as well. Okay.
Hey, sir. I began with about 10 years of bouncing between all the launch ranges. I ended up working every single one of our different vehicles, putting up about a satellite on every one of the constellations before I made it to the weapons school. Following that, that's where we met. It was out in Korea. And since then, it bounced around the weapons and tactics community, the STARCOM staff, and coming into exercises, taking that mission planning technique from across my career, as well as all of those exercises we did in Korea over at the 392nd, bringing that expertise.
Great, thank you both for that background, and it seems like you're ideally suited to your current positions. Can you tell our Space Force Association members a little bit about the term orbital warfare? It probably conjures up all sorts of different images, some accurate, perhaps some not. Can you give us a breakdown of what do we mean when we say the term orbital warfare? And how does this fit in with the Chief of Space Operations, Joe Saltzman's theory of success?
Yeah, you bet. I can definitely say what it is not is like a scene out of Star Wars where they're yanking and banking in space. So that's the first thing to make clear. It is not. Within the construct of where we are as a Space Force to secure our nation's interests in, from, and through space, really orbital warfare is really about protecting and defending, and having that kind of posture to ensure that we are able to deter our adversaries, and if necessary, on order, being able to defeat them and defeat those kind of orbital threats, whatever those might be. Thoughts, Nugget?
So the only thing I'd add is, as we think about those tenets of being prepared to meet those combatant commander intents and protect and defend on orbit, is that it ties straight into competitive endurance. Really all 3 tenets is the physical mechanics of being in place to do what's necessary, to be ready on orbit, to be prepared to execute those orders, and to be ready.
Yep.
Great, thank you both for that. And as we see the rise of China's space capabilities as well, and the reliance that their military is building into those space systems, the importance of our capabilities to deter and, if necessary, defeat those grows in importance. Colonel Nakatani, can you tell us a little bit more about the 392nd Combat Training Squadron? What kinds of personnel are in your unit? How many are there? What are their space specialty codes, those sorts of things?
Sure thing, Greg. So we're very lucky over at the 392nd, since we've stood up here at Schriever. The heraldry from Vandenberg has been moved out to Schriever now. We're very lucky to have a cross-cut of all of the AFSCs, or all of the job codes within the Space Force. So we have some acquirers, the cyber professionals, space operators across each of the space power disciplines, and intelligence, of course. We're a small unit, about 76 folks. I have about 20-some government there, and we plan and participate in all of the Space Force's service exercises. We help plan for the Joint Force. We provide hard exercise capabilities, so that's dropping in events into real-time systems worldwide. 392nd really does it all out of a single unit for that, the entire exercise spectrum.
That's great. Thank you. And General Moore, if we could bore into a little bit more of the Red Skies exercise in particular, can you kind of set the scene for most of the listeners here will have no concept of what this actually looked like. I mean, how many people were involved? What sort of, as much as you can share, what kind of scenario were you talking about? Were we, working orbital warfare in low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, or in geostationary orbit? How many people were involved? Were we all in the same room? So, some of those basics.
I can do some of that. I'd like to give a shout out to a handful of angry captains who about 2 years ago approached me because they needed some money, but also because they knew I had a passion for orbital warfare. Because it is very easy to approach the legacy space capabilities as just being a service provider, but recognizing we need to get into thinking about tactic, maneuver, position, timing, and tempo. And knowing that we need to be able to have a training environment and a device that allows for us to do that. This handful of angry captains about 2 years ago came to me with a device, an environment that they had found built by Northrop Grumman called Peregrine. And what this was it was essentially a dynamic space simulator with the actual mission planning software, real replication of systems. That really allowed operators to really learn their trade very specifically. So although one thing the team has learned from working with me is they come to me with a good idea and I go, this is brilliant, let's go do it. But then I say, hey, what would happen if I started connecting all these together? Could you guys go fight against each other? And they go, well, yeah, probably. And so really, Red Skies really went from just simply a tool for them to learn how to do orbital warfare and more into the how am I going to go up against a thinking adversary in the domain. So painting the picture as it is, Red Skies was really all about having a program level mission execution of tactical command control layer across different types of orbital warfare kill chains for the purpose of space superiority. And so what that means is I have assets that are maneuvering to protect and defend. I have assets that are being defended. It means I have intel informing me about what my aggressor may be doing or maybe not doing. It means I have space domain awareness. It means I've got the operational C2 node in play. That's what that means. What we had were about 6 deltas, I think, including Delta 1, about 37 participants, months and months and months of preparation, which I know Captain Moore isn't here with us right now, but big shout out to Captain Moore for pulling it all together and making it happen on time. She deserves a ton of credit. But it was essentially bringing all these folks in, doing the planning conferences, but ultimately in the execution, we were in a Northrop Grumman facility here in Colorado Springs. We had just recently had the ability to have it at the SAP level, which meant we were in a SAP-F. It meant that we were able to get all the systems accredited, and we were able to run this scenario at a program level. We had red and blue players. We had white cell. We had technical support from Northrop Grumman. We had aerospace. The objectives as we went after this was really to provide that combat realistic OW advanced training environment with an aggressor. It was to begin to explore the interoperability between the different OW players. But and that's what, Scott, from a training perspective, really that was his real purpose. And then I threw on a couple of objectives as well, because corporately I have a need to figure out where the gaps and seams are at a core Space Force mission level and begin to provide that feedback to the operational missions. And 2, I have a need to get away from a basic emulator training environment and much more into a dynamic, realistic operator in the loop, making hard decisions. And I need to be able to define those requirements. I think historically, as the government write requirements, those are great, I'm sure, not always easily understood by industry. But for me, being able to invest in this environment and be able to drive through this gave us the opportunity to start defining what those OTTI requirements need to look like. It actually gives me an exemplar. It gives me something to practice and try with as I begin to define what it is we need as a government to industry to say, when you're building a satellite that's tactically relevant, this is what the simulator needs to look like. And I can talk more about that later. But really from the training responsibility, Scott was very much focused on the operator, and I love the operators too, don't get me wrong, but from a corporate perspective, it was more important to inform the Space Force and to be able to inform OTTI and all of those investments for where we're going in what I would suggest where we need to go for future training. Did that paint that picture well enough for you?
It does. But I'd like to pull up, just to give folks a little bit of historical perspective. How does this compare with what we were doing exercise-wise like 5 years ago? Maybe even more, maybe less time than that. And just to give people an understanding of where we're heading and how quickly you all are driving Space Force and Space Force capability.
Sure thing, Greg.
Take that.
Yes, sir. I would. So we really began hustling hard in this over the fall, where Space Force exercises have been traditionally defined by getting the trainers and the instructors in a room and saying, what do you need to do? And so by that nature, they've been very focused on initial skills, on keeping people current, on presenting that crew force. And looking at the direction from our secretary, the direction from the force, the laydown of our theaters, we determined now is the time to get after our way our forces are presented. And that means planning towards how the Space Force will be utilized in operations plans. So our entire exercises have pivoted more towards the presentation of forces. So not unlike our time in Korea, and we were part of all of those 7th Air Force exercises. And how does the Air Force present into that theater? That's where the Space Force is going. We've re-looked at how we present within the joint targeting cycle and refocused our exercises to each one of those service retained bodies that will come in an O-plan implementation. So what does that mean for the components and how they're going to write mission command orders now that the Space Force has identified that and we're working on our doctrine? How will the components who did not exist a year ago, how will they do that? And so we're focusing Polaris Hammer on that. Space Flag's legacy is bringing and introducing mission planning to the crews and debriefing in that crew culture to units that had been stood up in a permissive environment. And how do we learn from every iteration, every sortie, and bring that back to the components? And as we look forward to how the Space Force will be presented, Space Flag represents that planning cell that ensures that we take the orders derived from the joint direction and that we create a sortie that doesn't have folks running into each other, that doesn't step on frequencies, that's actually executable given the common facility and connection threads that the Space Force must live in. And now we just start getting into the skies and tying back to what is Red Skies. It's taking all of that, all of the new scenario development and pieces that are informing corporate process, getting towards combat realism, and making sure that those orders, as they've come down through all of our new processes, are executable, and running through as many of these iterations as we can to develop our doctrine, to set our processes, to be ready for when the Space Force is called on to support O-plans.
And that's a perfect answer. I think another thing that's different as we continue to evolve in these exercises, or is in these venues, is a lot like what was invested in out in Nellis to give fighter pilots and bomber pilots, right, their first 5-10 combat missions, to walk away from the first few missions tired and sweaty, frustrated. I think we owe it to our guardians to do the exact same. If they're coming out of training thinking, oh, that was exactly what I expected, we failed. If they don't have to make really hard decisions, if they don't have to navigate tough choices, if they are not getting surprised by an adversary, if they are not having to exercise potentially some independent command and control over their system, If they don't come out realizing that they failed, I think our training has fallen short. I think we're done with the days of, I would recommend that we're done with the days of simply affirming that somebody did some good data entry and data verification. It is now serious as a heart attack. It is now about really pushing our guardians well beyond any place where I was ever pushed in any of my training. And because that's what our adversary is going to do. And so we've got to be able to present that to them in these kind of training venues as well. They come out tired and sweaty and sore. We've done our job. Yep.
Thanks. I was just recalling back to some Global Lightning, Global Thunder exercises 5-6 years ago. And it's basically, was GPS on during the entire exercise, right? So it was all of that, providing those space capabilities to the joint warfighter. And now it's evolved into so much more. Now, continue to provide those capabilities, but ensure that you're able to continue to provide those capabilities by defeating threats and also denying adversary their own capabilities. So,
right. And even for those larger exercises like that, I noticed at the 21st Space Wing, our tactical operators got very little out of those. So I've got to go have a place where they can go and do the things they need to do to practice and execute their trade, that these higher headquarter exercises just aren't going to cut it.
Right. Colonel Nakatani, let's turn to your organization, the mighty 392nd Combat Training Squadron. What were your personnel's roles in Red Skies? You mentioned Captain Moore briefly, but how was the 392nd postured to pull this thing off?
Absolutely. So the 392nd, I learned a lot. This is our first all compartmentalized play exercise. So we've learned a lot. We've put in some additional requirements. There's a heavy lift on the security team in particular. A lot of it had to do with getting access to all the players. Lots of lessons.
Could I ask you to kind of explain a little bit, like when you say compartmentalized capabilities? There are some folks that may not be familiar with that term.
Absolutely, Greg. So like when I'm talking to my family about what does that mean, for every system that exists out there, every aircraft, every tank, every satellite, there are certain facts about it that need to be retained at a higher level. A lot of it has to do with the planning implementation, about the full capability of whatever that system is, and they all have that. And having those full accesses so that you can plan how things will work in real life is critical. It's critically important to putting on any sort of exercise or integrated sortie like this.
It's been a problem, I think, for a long time that we have hand-waved a lot of classified capabilities out of exercises because we haven't either been in an environment or where people were adequately cleared. And this was absolutely one of those where we're not waving anything away. We're going to go after as much truth and fact as we can without just hand-waving.
So all 37 of your participants were all cleared to a common level, which is where the exercise took place.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah. Colonel Nakatani, please continue on in terms of the 392nd and how you all supported Red Skies and what were your training objectives?
100%. And so we had refocused on how the Space Force would be presented. And so we took that common work of a single scenario and applied it through getting everyone cleared to the same level. We went through all there's a lot of homework to get everybody into one place, especially when the Space Force is still working on building out their ranges, the places that we own to play. So we did all of that, the scenario writing, the possibilities where players could take it, to make sure that all of those products that would exist through the entire spectrum of what the players could do would be there, that they wouldn't drive their satellite someplace. And we said, well, we didn't quite get to what that means corporately, but that we had all of those inputs and that we had the right people on the lines, is bringing together that whole party, all the different stakeholders that would be represented in a fight like that, and just even protect and defend normal day-to-day ops, making sure that we understood what they would do, so that when the players came in, there was no dark horse path they could run down that we had no idea what that would mean in theory.
Our ability, yeah.
And so for our training objectives for the members was a lot of, how do you work together as crews? You haven't previously been cleared to talk to each other. And so those fundamental mechanics, the blocking and tackling, the scrimmaging together, how do you do those things now that you can talk to each other, and now that these new concepts and new capabilities come online? How is it that you work together to present a consolidated singular drive space effect, and not everyone's squadron is doing their core mission?
Yeah, I really failed to appreciate the amount of work it takes to put on an event like this, and huge credit to Delta One and 392nd for all of the diligence and detail they put into these things. It's easy for general officers to overlook how much work it takes to do something. I became intimately familiar with that, and so I appreciate the entire team's effort on that, and did a great job.
Well, thanks both of you. And so it sounds like from a 392nd standpoint, you had some of the more unglamorous positions or challenges for putting on the exercise, making sure the logistics were there, the scenario made sense, the participants had a place to stay, right? Those sorts of things. Did you actually have anybody participating directly in the exercises as a participant, or were those positions reserved for folks in the operational squadrons?
So from exercise control, the unit was primarily that white cell, the control of it, but we brought in much of our STARCOM brethren. So we had aggressors who were there and informing the way that the red was moving within the scenario, but primarily within the enabling functions. And the players all came from their service-retained SpOC bodies, those people that will be there to do the job when called upon by our nation.
Thank you for the clarification. So looking at orbital warfare, what sorts of skills and what sorts of people are you looking to bring into these various operational squadrons and training units as well? For folks out there that are thinking about joining the Space Force or already in the Space Force and read a little bit about Red Skies and think, wow, that sounds pretty interesting. What sorts of things should they be focused on? What would that interview process look like to become an orbital warrior?
So my recommendations would be is understand the physics of the domain well enough to intuitively understand what's happening. If you have to go back to the books, if you have to slow down in order to understand what's going on, you probably need to study some more about the physics in the domain. The second thing that I would recommend is that being able to visualize the environment and being able to visualize an engagement is really important. And that's kind of the application of that physics. Some of that will be how the engagement is observed from the ground, how I understand position and relative motion between two objects relative to the ground. And then I would say there's also the need to be able to visualize an engagement from the perspective of object one and object two. And I'll just leave them generically as objects, but being able to understand where each one is relative to the other, to the best of our knowledge, and being able to understand where my current orbit will put me relative to where the current orbit of the other object will put it in time. And then I think probably the third part of that intellect is how do I get that data? Where do I get that data from? And how timely does that data need to be? In order to be able to paint that picture in my head, being able to visualize and understand what that looks like on a console. I think the other part too, and I think this is where as I was thinking through this, right, the word competitive comes to mind, and I don't mean to make it like competitive endurance. It doesn't necessarily equate directly to competitive endurance, but I think a competitive spirit is absolutely necessary because while we certainly do not want conflict in space to extend into space, in reality, if it does, it's going to be a game of winners and losers. And you don't want to be a loser. And so having a competitive approach and a competitive mindset of I need to outdo my adversary, which means in training, I need to outdo my aggressor, which means in my day-to-day job, I need to be striving to be better than the Guardian who's next to me, I think is really important. And then I'll say the last trait, and interested in Scott's perspective on this, is our Guardians have to be patiently impatient. And what I mean by that is we are growing and evolving and learning. We're restructuring. We're thinking through how we do our mission. We're thinking through what does orbital warfare really mean? Because honestly, after millennia of naval warfare, millennia of land warfare, and a century of air warfare, we really have some pretty good concepts of what that means. But our Guardians need to be a little cagey. They need to be a little dissatisfied with where we are, because they're going to be able to push those boundaries in both the intellect, skill sets, and the capabilities that the nation's going to need into the future. So,
yes, sir, I'd agree with 100% of that. The Guardians have to stay hungry. We all see where we need to grow, and we have to address that head on. And we don't have time to kind of look away from the problem set. And then the only skill that I would recommend that ties into everything that General Moore had to say is that mission planning skill set.
sure.
So each one of these individual Guardians, they're bringing in expertise from wherever they're coming. And Space Force purpose designed, right? We did not bring over anything that does not lead directly to mission accomplishment. So every single one of these Guardians who is looking at orbital warfare and participating in exercises and what does it mean as a concept of employing the Space Force and note plan, they are able to integrate through mission planning. That applies all the way from my history, launching rockets, of bringing together who owns the payload, the vehicle, the ground connections, all of those same skills, bringing together everyone who has equities and the shared common resourcing, and how do you get to an accomplishment in a time period. And what do you learn from that mission planning cycle of continuing to do that, even when you don't have a lot of great lessons learned, right? So to the crewmen who are pulling crew in on the mid shift tonight, looking back and making sure you're putting that truth, that that what you've put down, that if you have something to learn, that it's going there. And if it's not, you're fundamentally true to yourself and what you've done, and that you are growing all the time. Like back to that staying hungry and that mission planning piece, no matter where a Guardian is coming from, they have a role to play. And how they continually learn, that's going to be the most important to the service overall as we move forward.
Thanks. That's a tremendous breakdown. So it strikes me that it's a mixture of science and art, like we have in every other domain. The physics are the same, they're just applied differently in the space domain. So learning those classic orbital elements and having them just instinctively in mind, and then being able to creatively apply those through the mission planning process and integrate with other capabilities from other domains. Sounds like what you're looking for, and I know we've got some very talented folks out there already getting after it, and devising training to develop that kind of mindset and those sorts of skills, I think, is an ongoing evolution as well. It strikes me, so we've been talking a little bit about the Red Skies exercise. Colonel Nakatani, you briefly mentioned Space Flag, which has been around for five years or so, maybe a little bit longer. And there's also a Black Skies exercise. Can you help us understand the different themes for the different space exercises that are going on these days? Absolutely.
So we have those three tiers we talked about before, and the named exercises as they exist now is Polaris Hammer, is at our closest to the strategic level, and it's focused on those service components. How will they implement mission command? How will they write orders? How will they interface with a 5-day planning cycle when our cycles can often take much longer? And giving them that time and space and opportunity to cycle through how they will make those orders down to the service. There's also the feedback loop there, whereas they make those things, I'll take them down to my next level exercises in that nested tiered approach that the SecAF directed at AFA. I'll take those orders and those processes down, and we'll be trying them out across the whole force. So that's our Polaris Hammer. A space flag is the orders have been cut, the targets are approved. Now go and take your portion forces and create a consolidated sortie to achieve the commander's objective. And by introducing that mission planning and that integrated space sortie since, I want to say it's 2017, apologies to the team for not knowing the exact date when we started space flag, but that legacy is enduring throughout our crew construct. From when I really entered hard into planning and leading exercises till now, it's all credit is due to space flag for normalizing that mission planning and debriefing culture throughout all of our crews that is so fundamental to mission command and where the Space Force needs to go now, and that's space flag's legacy. Underneath space flag, once the integrated sortie is set, the timing and tempo, that phased effects to meet the overall scheme of maneuver for the joint force, those pieces are being brought into the Skies series. And we say tactical, but I do need to recognize that, for example, in an electronic warfare fight, there may be command and control from the operational level, but we're focused on the tactical actions that ops crew is making. They may reside at an operational level, but it's more about how do they tactically do C2 to get those effects in place on time. And then down to the crews, trying to give them the most realistic thing that they will see when they're expected to execute these orders. So that's how we've tiered. The Skies series currently are themed around colors. Red skies is orbital warfare. Black skies is electromagnetic warfare. Blue skies will be focused on the cyber mission defense and looking at how do we get after some of General Miller's intent over at SpOC to have skies focused on each one of his mission areas, potentially each one of his deltas as we move forward.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So you've got Polaris Hammer at the strategic level, you've got Space Flag more at the operational level, and then you have a series of tactical exercises, the different colored skies that you mentioned, focusing on different tactical employments in those different mission areas. So that makes perfect sense. So it's been a couple of months since you conducted the first Red Skies. I was wondering if I'm sure there were, we always say lessons learned. I'm sure it's an ongoing process to learn those lessons and then also move forward from them. How did we do? How did Red Skies go in terms of our participants and I'm sure we got after training objectives, but what's your overall sense of how Red Skies went off?
Yes, sir. I want to begin with I'm super proud of the participants of our team. They brought an intensity that I just found incredibly refreshing. With any first effort, we learned a lot about our con ops and processes. We took a lot of lessons learned there. We discovered nuances about our planning assumptions within our own, just within the 392nd scenario that we need to reconcile with the command phasing and timing. We learned an incredible amount, and the success of our skeleton crew, because we were trying to run multiple exercises at the same time, just really shows how much our service needs this exercise, that even with just a handful of people coming together to do what's necessary, we immediately see the scope that it needs to go to, and we need to bootstrap this to the whole force. It's not just those folks who maybe have more fuel than others, but it's everyone. And we need to understand, even for our less agile satellites on orbit, what is possible and how do they tie into this scheme of maneuver on orbit. Just exceptionally pleased with how the exercise went.
I'll say we learned a lot in doing this scrimmage, and some of that certainly was how we put a scrimmage together and allow for operators and aggressors to engage. But it also pointed to the fact that there certainly are skills and drills we need to work through before we get into the scrimmage, right? Like I know I'm often criticized for sports metaphors, but it makes sense, right? You focus on skills and drills and you scrimmage and you go, okay, here are the skills and drills I need to tweak. So that was really good. There were certainly a lot of places where we've got room to improve, both in the execution and in the planning. And to be honest with you, that's good and that's okay, because this is the first time we did it, particularly at the special access program level. There were so many hurdles and so many things that when we do it next time, it's going to be better. and then we're going to do it again, and it's going to be better next time. And so I am encouraged by that, because I think I probably said to Scott before, if I said it to Captain Moore, if everything goes perfectly, it means we didn't reach far enough. And we did reach, and there were some things that didn't go as great as we wanted to, and that's okay. What I do think it points to, though, is that just buying great new advanced technology is never going to be good enough. Unless we have people who know how to employ those capabilities in unique and diverging circumstances, and having those tactics, techniques, procedures, that doctrine, that foundational common understanding of how we're going to fight and win. Without some of that, we're going to struggle. And so I guess part of my plea to whether it's Guardians who are watching, or industry, is technology is never going to be good enough. We're going to have to always think critically about how we're going to apply these things, particularly in ways that are going to keep our adversaries off balance, right? As much as we don't want to get surprised by them, they don't want to get surprised by us, and I want to make sure we can surprise them. Yep.
Thank you. So with one rep under our belt now, how do you see Red Skies evolving, or in which directions? And you already alluded to some of this, General Moore. Over the next 5 years or so, are we thinking about down the road sometime we'd actually have on-orbit assets that you would be commanding and controlling and maneuvering potentially, and combined with a virtual environment that would also be supporting the exercise? How do you see this thing going in the next 4 or 5 years?
So Scott already touched on the intellectual underpinnings, the tie back to O plans, to JSOP, to all those things. And so I won't go back over that. I definitely think that as we do a Red Skies, an independent Red Skies, independent Black Skies, independent Blue Skies, that eventually those are going to be nested as well, and there will be interplay between those domains, right? We absolutely have to fight and win in all of those domains, and probably other domains that are coming, or other concepts that are coming as well, that we're going to have to integrate and synthesize. So that would be one difference. That they will be feeding on and passing information back and forth, and depending on one another in order to get a job done. I would anticipate that we're going to have a much greater emphasis on an integrated environment that is able to do live over sim. So will we be able to do things and task assets, whether it's EW, cyber, or on orbit in the live? And the answer is yeah, maybe, probably. I would suggest that there are certainly capabilities we do not necessarily want to expose, and that a virtual environment certainly allows for us to protect that. It certainly allows for us to practice. It certainly allows for us to fail, because not only do I not want special capabilities being observed by an adversary, I don't want them to know that I may or may not routinely make a mistake at a particular point in operation until I get good enough at it. So there's certainly a conceal aspect that the virtual environment gives us. My plea to industry in particular is that as you're developing capabilities, we don't want emulation of your capability. We want your simulation of your capability, best informed by the operational kinematic performance of your system. Period. I want your real ground system. I want your real planning software. I want everything as real as possible, so that if the Guardians make a mistake, it lets them make a mistake. It can't be standalone. It needs to be able to integrate. That if I have a dynamic taskable Lockheed system, it needs to be able to be in an integrated simulation environment with a dynamic Northrop system, or a dynamic Boeing system, or anybody else who happens to be building a tactically relevant and dynamic capability. We need to be able to have the simulator in there. And so they need to be able to work together. I need to be able to project my operational overlay that's being used out at Delta 5 or Delta 15, and I have to use the real software. I can't have somebody bring me in some 3D goggles while they may be awesome, if they're not using 3D goggles out at Delta 5 and Delta 15, I don't want them. So that's part of it. I think we need to really make sure that they can work with RED models, that we're able to, the simulation's able to work with a simulated satellite control network, space domain awareness network, those kind of things. So that's where it's got to go. Colonel Corey Klopstein, who's our OTTI PEO, has the same exact vision. He knows where we want to go, and he's been a great partner in this regard. As we take on smaller chunks in the near term, the long-term 5, 8, 10-year vision puts us in a place where our Guardians are actually interacting in a way that they will in a real-world combat scenario.
The only addition I'd have is this all belies to where we go holistically in terms of so much of what we do is already sent digitally. And I would like to bring together all the Guardians to fight as a force, as we will, from their home stations, fighting through that distributed piece where the exercise is indistinguishable from real world ops, except for that banner at the top and bottom that says exercise. And as we're looking at all these different systems, that they've got to be able to ride into that common infrastructure, that common digital environment on how we get after this, for that we can get into a whole of service exercise.
Yeah.
We can get a whole of service assessment to really inform our CONOPS and where we're going as a Space Force.
Well, thank you both for that. And looking around at some General Whiting's directives, and it's not a new thing, but the focus on partnership building. Understand that Red Skies exercise was held at a classification level that was at special access program level. Are there any plans for bringing in coalition partners to a Red Skies-like event? And perhaps not at the classification level that this particular exercise was at, but down the road, what does the roadmap look like for coalition participation?
Good job.
So part of our focus on combat realism is that we bring in our coalition partners in those places that they'll be there in the fight. And so if I have an electromagnetic warfare capability, that'll be a portion and part of a specific O plan, then I'm working actively now to bring those partners into that Black Skies exercise. When we have partners who are more in the nascent stages, but they're definitely part of a military alliance, say NATO, US forces, or the Korea coalition, that's where we're looking to bring in those additional partners where they have those accesses, they have their part in those plans, and that we're refocusing these exercises more on what is, or at least what will be in a certain time epoch, maybe a few years in the future, and that we bring in those partners such that we are exercising what, at least in those teams and crews that will exist. And so we foresee Polaris Hammer expanding beyond the single theater that's currently focused on. Perhaps there'll be different names for the different components, right? That's all the Space Force components. Every single one of them have international partners that maybe don't bring tangible hard capabilities that would be more appropriate for a skies or a space flag. I see a lot of growth there for our partners.
Yeah, I do too. And I think in particular for different kinds of Red Skies scenarios, if my scenario is largely a defensive posture, it allows for me to operate that at a TSSCI level. So as long as my partner has access to the same intelligence I have about certain types of adversary capabilities, and we're looking to do coordinated tactical actions, then there really is an opportunity to work through that in partnership. The one thing that is really important in these alliances and partners is that when they come into a tactical scenario like this one, it's going to be really important that they have commensurate capabilities, policies, and CONOPS. The CONOPS we can work on, I think, but if they don't have the capabilities or the policies that allow for them to operate in this new domain, in this new concept of what does it mean what does space warfare mean, and what does orbital warfare mean? then it makes it difficult, which is why I think outside of Scott's responsibility, but I think that's why Schriever War Game is so important, is because it really does allow for you to work through, hey, what kind of capabilities do we really need in the partnerships and alliances? What are the common policies and postures, and think what do we need to really be shoulder to shoulder in this? And then it does, at some point in theory, get to a place of, well, here's how we would establish certain kind of con-ops and barriers where a certain nation would be comfortable with actions up to this point, and another nation would be more comfortable with actions up past that point. But in particular, at the tactical level, if it comes down to a protect and defend scenario, it is absolutely doable. The biggest challenge will be finding a way to get the dynamic simulator that they may or may not be, hopefully they do have, being able to get that into the environment so that they can replicate their behaviors. And I would also say that it would be an open welcome for the National Reconnaissance Office if they want to be in play, if they want to participate shoulder to shoulder with the United States Space Force in different kinds of scenarios. That the door is wide open, and again, that's why I'm just so enthusiastic and proud of what happened with Red Skies. Was it really laid the foundation to define what we need to do in order to bring more and more people together, and across multiple different domains. It began to answer a lot of questions.
No, that's fantastic. And you can almost imagine, like today we have red flag out at Nellis, as you mentioned before, and sometimes we have NATO participants, sometimes we have nations outside of NATO, all participating in the same exercise. Not all the time, but you can imagine that sort of a scenario in a space-related exercise as well.
Yep.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate your answers and your willingness to sit down and talk to our Space Force Association members. Was there any other comments that you'd like to have here as we conclude?
You can go first. So I don't steal any of your words.
100%, sir.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm just incredibly excited to be here at the 392nd, where we're taking this focus on combat credibility, combat realism, and bringing it to our service. The time is now for us to be focusing in on what does that mean to be a presented force, to be able to accurately plan our capabilities for our joint and coalition partners, to be combat credible when we're called upon for our nation. And 392nd, STARCOM as a whole, is really leading a lot of that push. And we're just so incredibly excited to be here at this moment now. And as all of our field commands are all pivoting towards the same direction, I'm just really looking forward to it.
Yeah, there is so much to be encouraged by. This is the Space Force that I wish I would have joined back in 1996. The opportunities are extraordinary. So are the threats. And so for that reason, the junior members of the Space Force, you've got an incredible future. There is so much work to be done, and you're going to be right into the thick of it. To the industry partners, the closer you can communicate and relate to the operational community, the better. I know that the program offices have the money, and that's a great thing. But in reality, understanding what we need in the operational frame is going to be really important to building the combat winning, the competition enduring capabilities that we need as a nation. I would recommend everybody continually revisit General Saltzman's C-note on rethinking space superiority. The bottom line is we are here to contest and, when directed, control a physical domain. And that is why we're here. We know our adversaries are bringing capabilities to the fight in order to enable their own forces, as well as deny our joint forces our proven space capabilities as well. And so the sooner we truly, in everything we do, think about how we protect our own capabilities and defend the joint force from hostile space capabilities, the better off we'll all be. Building that combat discipline, building that combat credibility is the absolute number one most important thing we need to do. And it's a privilege being part of this team in making that happen. Thanks, Greg.
All right, well, thank you both for your leadership and vision. Have a great afternoon, and Semper Super.
Semper Super.